Have you ever wondered why the abortion industry fights so desperately against legislation that would ban partial birth abortions? Since all other late-term procedures would still be legal, no abortions would be prohibited by such a ban. In the end, any woman who would have had an abortion before the ban could still get one afterward. It would simply be accomplished using a different method. Something else has to be driving the abortion industry's almost frantic defense of partial birth abortion, and you're about to learn what it is. I'm Mark Crutcher, president of Life Dynamics Incorporated in Denton, Texas. For the past 2 years, we've been conducting an investigation into the link between the abortion industry and fetal tissue research. What we have uncovered is a system in which the parts and sometimes the whole bodies of unborn children are being marketed like used cars. Pick up the 64 pages of documentation that accompany this video, and you hold in your hands undeniable proof that the trafficking of baby parts in America is a grim reality. The fact is, abortion clinics in this country are charging women several hundred and sometimes several $1,000s for abortions, and then maximizing profits by wholesaling the bodies of their dead children. And this is where partial birth abortion comes in. Until the introduction of this procedure, late-term abortions were performed using methods the abortion industry had always claimed were perfectly safe. And although there is ample evidence that this claim is not true, let's assume for a moment that it is. Let's stipulate that these procedures pose little or no risk for the women who submit to them. The question then becomes, what is the motivation to suddenly start doing partial birth abortions? After all, no legitimate physician would ever purposely manipulate an unborn child into a feet-first position for delivery. In medical terms, this is called a breech presentation, and anyone who knows the first thing about birthing of children knows that this can be a dangerous situation for the woman involved. But even though a breech delivery is precisely how a partial birth abortion is accomplished, the abortion industry continues to claim that they do them to protect the health and safety of women. This is politically motivated hogwash. Let's cut to the chase here. First, partial birth abortion was introduced onto the scene almost immediately after it became known that there was a lucrative market for fetal tissue. Second, of all the late-term abortion procedures, partial birth is the only one that leaves you with a body that can be dissected and sold for parts. You would have to be hopelessly naive to conclude that these two facts are somehow coincidental. In reality, not only are they directly related, they expose the abortion industry's hidden agenda. If our investigation has shown anything, it is that fetal tissue marketing is the father of partial birth abortion. There is simply no other plausible explanation why a physician would intentionally create a breech delivery. And to contend that it is done for the well-being of the woman is utterly ridiculous. Any way you cut it, the hidden agenda behind partial birth abortion is the wholesaling of dead babies. Read the printed material that came with this video, and you're going to know how this system works. You're going to know who the wholesalers are and how they circumvent federal laws which prohibit the marketing of human body parts. You're going to see how these wholesalers are connected to the abortion industry, the sales pitches they use to attract customers, and how much they charge. And these documents put another abortion industry lie to rest. Look at the number of purchase orders that require babies with no abnormalities. Then recall how many times you've heard some abortion industry representative claim that late-term abortions are only done on babies who are so profoundly handicapped that they couldn't survive anyway. Make no mistake about it. Like I said at the beginning of this video, these babies are being sold like used cars. While we were posing as a potential customer, we were told that tissue prices are negotiable, we were offered discounts if we bought in volume, and we were assured that if we became a good enough customer, we'd even find some free parts being thrown our way. Our investigation is by no means complete. Beyond what's here, we have additional data that will be released later, and we are still undercover gathering even more documentation. Now, in a moment, you will be able to watch a 14-minute interview with Kelly, one of our operatives who used to harvest tissue at a Planned Parenthood abortion clinic. This chilling interview was conducted by my assistant, Zentra Tuttle, and was originally seen on the May 1999 edition of Life Talk. In this conversation, you will hear Kelly testify that abortion procedures are routinely altered to produce the desired tissue, and that this often results in the birth of living babies who are then suffocated, stabbed, or bludgeoned to death and their parts taken. If you find that too ghastly to be believable, just look at the orders contained here and notice those which call for the baby to be dissected and its parts on ice within 10 minutes following death. Then ask yourself how realistic that is unless the baby was taken from the mother's womb alive. What's even more horrific, Kelly and others have told us that babies who survive their abortions are sometimes still alive while being chopped up for parts. You know, we've all heard the old saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And in many ways, this situation is a textbook example of that philosophy. We have found that much of the research being done with fetal tissue has absolutely unassailable motives. No one can question the humanitarian value of trying to cure AIDS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, blindness, or any other disease. But if we are going to use human tissue to do these things, we cannot claim that how this tissue was acquired is irrelevant. Tissue taken from someone who died a natural or accidental death is one thing. Tissue harvested from children who were purposely killed and their dead bodies sold in the marketplace is quite another. In closing, I want to propose an experiment to you. In a quiet moment, take one of the purchase orders from this document and look at it closely. And as you do, think about the fact that when that order was received by Planned Parenthood, the baby whose body would be used to fill it was still alive. If you had been in that abortion clinic, you could have taken that order off the fax machine, walked over to the window between the office and the waiting room, and seen the woman sitting there whose unborn child was about to be killed and sold for parts. If we believe that finding a cure for disease will put a happy face on that sort of barbarism, then we are living in the kind of deception that will eventually destroy us.
To start with, just so that everybody understands, your real name is not Kelly. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Why don't you start by telling us how long did you work for the abortion clinic?
Well, for one, I did not work for an abortion clinic as an employee. I worked for an outside source hired with a team to go in and dissect and procure fetal tissue, basically to dissect tissue for high-quality sales.
Okay, so you were actually working for an outside company that was gathering fetal tissue, but you were doing this inside the clinic?
Right, but we were never employees of the abortion clinic. What we did was we would have a contract with an abortion clinic that would allow a certain number of us to go in there on certain days, and we would procure fetal tissue for research. We would get a generated list each day to tell us what tissue researchers, pharmaceutical companies, universities were looking for. Then we would go and look at the patient charts. We had to screen out all the ones we didn't want. What I mean by that is that we would not use anything that had STDs or fetal anomalies. These had to be the most perfect specimens we could give the researchers for the best value that we could sell for.
What gestational ages were you talking about for these babies?
We would look starting at 7 weeks all the way up to 30 plus.
All the way to over 30 weeks gestation. You were harvesting parts from aborted babies?
That's correct. That's correct. And we were looking anywhere from eyes, livers, brains, thymuses, and especially cardiac blood, cord blood, the blood from the liver, even blood from the limbs that we would get from the veins.
Now, just a minute ago, you said that you had to screen out all the babies with abnormalities.
Right.
But when you're talking about babies at 30 weeks gestation, wouldn't the majority of these abortions be for abnormalities?
No, I mean, there was only probably a 2% that had abnormalities. The rest were very healthy donors. And how we knew that they were healthy was, one, we would check to see if the mother had any prenatal care that suggested she had birth defects. That was the reason why she was there to have the abortion. But 95% of the time, no. It was just that she was there to get rid of the baby.
So how many of the later terms, the ones that are around 30 weeks or so, would you see in a week?
Probably an estimate of 30 or 40 a week.
Of the late terms?
Of the late terms.
Of the late terms.
That's anywhere from 22 weeks all the way up to 30 weeks plus.
Let's talk a bit about how you worked with the researchers. You said it was universities and pharmaceutical
companies. That's correct. And also private contractors who would, we would sell them the tissue. They would in turn collect the cells and in turn sell those cells to other universities and to other researchers. So basically there was a high demand every week from universities and pharmaceutical companies throughout the world just to buy fetal tissue.
How did you get these specimens to the researchers?
Every researcher that we sold to had their own private way they wanted it shipped, whether it was UPS, FedEx, airborne, or a special courier that they would we would take the specimen in a box to the airport and put it on as regular cargo, and they would pick it up at their destination.
Do you think these shipping companies knew that they were transporting aborted baby parts?
No, all they knew was that it was just human cells, when it actually wasn't cells. We're talking sometimes it would be a completely intact fetus, or it might be a batch of eyes, or 30 to 40 livers going out that day, or thymuses. Whatever it may be, there was mass quantities of it going out.
The babies at the clinic, the aborted ones that you didn't take parts out of, or you didn't ship the entire body, how did you dispose of them?
If they could, we would usually put it down the garbage disposal along with the placenta and the leftover blood material, and that would just get down the drain. If it was large enough and wouldn't go down the drain, they had a special freezer, and we would freeze all it may be a total of 60 to 70 fetuses in one box, frozen in a freezer to be picked up in a month's time for incineration.
How is it that you came to be talking to Life Dynamics? I mean, you're working in this abortion clinic, gathering fetal parts. It seems like we'd be the last people you'd want to talk to.
Well, when I was working, there was an incident that came my way and my staff's way, that there was a set of twins at 24 weeks gestation brought back to us. These twins were both in a pan and they were both alive, meaning that there was maybe just a couple of nicks from the tongs that had pulled them out, but these fetuses were moving and gasping for air. And the doctor came back and basically looked at us and said, "Got you some good specimens, twins." And I looked at him and said, "There's something wrong here. They are moving. I don't do this. This is not in my contract."
So they just brought you these babies and said, "Here, do whatever you want with them."
That's correct. And I told him I would not be any part of extinguishing their lives. So he basically got a bottle of sterile water and poured it in the pans until the fluid ran up to their mouths and nose, and basically let them drown themselves, which didn't take very long. And I did not stay in the room to watch that. I left the room because I would not watch those fetuses moving.
So he basically, not basically, what he did do was kill those babies outside the mother's womb.
That's correct.
After they'd been born.
That's correct. And then we, as a staff, did procure fetal tissue from those under protest.
Do you know how long it took those babies to die?
No, because we left the room. I would not watch.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically when I decided that it was wrong. Basically, I did not want to be there when that happened, because after that incident, there was more times that we had live births come back to us.
Really?
16 weeks, all the way up to sometimes even 30 weeks. And the doctor would either break the neck or take a pair of tongs and basically beat the fetus until it was dead.
Do you think the doctor ever altered the procedures to get you the type of specimens you needed for
yes,
that
every
day?
day when we would go in to do procedures, the doctor would come in along with his nurse, and they would want to see the list of what we were going to procure and what we needed. Then he would basically get us the most complete, intact specimen that he could get us. And what I mean by that is that all the limbs, the arms, the head, the chest cavity, were never invaded. They were all completely intact. Sometimes, if the fetus appeared to be dead, but when you open up the chest cavity, you do see the heart beating, but there's no arms or legs moving.
So they were intentionally altering their type of procedure to give you an intact specimen, even if that meant giving you a live specimen.
That's correct. Just so we could sell better tissue and more tissue out so that our company would make more money. And at the end of the year, they would actually give the clinic back more money since we got good specimens.
So they were basically trying to keep your company's business and maybe get a little extra out of your company. And that's why they were changing the procedures for you.
Yes, that's correct. When you have a second trimester abortion, you have to have a certain number of lamicells placed in the vagina to dilate the cervix. And that way, when you go in after your third day procedure, and they would change out these lambs on the third day, they would pull the lambs, the fetus would come out. But in the motel room, sometimes these lambs would move.
What are these lambs you're talking about?
They're a dilator. They're made up of some type of seaweed. They're hard when they go in, and they dilate you just like you're giving birth. But when they sent these women to the motel room, because they had to stay in town, sometimes these lambs would fall out, and she would go into labor, and the fetus would expel itself out.
So these women were basically having a 2-day procedure, and the first day they were dilated with the laminaria.
Lambs.
And then they'd go to this hotel overnight expecting to come back for their abortion the following day.
Right.
But instead, they'd go into labor.
Right.
In the hotel room.
Right. And then they would give us a call to the nurse, and the nurse would call the doctor, and they would go to the motel room and pick up the woman and the fetus.
Were these fetuses coming out alive?
Yes, they were coming out alive. And they would bring back the fetus in a bucket, along with the placenta and the mother. They had to get resuction, so they brought her back to the clinic. And that's when they would give us a call during the night and say, okay, we've got a couple of specimens here for you, or we've got one specimen. We would then go, and the specimen would be in a bucket, and then we would empty it out. And when we knew that it was alive is when you opened up the chest cavity, the heart was still beating. Sometimes you could even see movement in the bucket. They had to come out alive. There was no way for those fetuses to be coming out dead. They were all alive. And how they maintained them, or did they kill them in there, was anybody's guess. My guess is that they had to kill them in the bucket or put them in a corner and let them die slowly.
Because the doctor had seen how strongly you reacted to seeing them killed in front of you. So he made
sure he did not repeat those instances, but they kept happening anyway, and that's how I came to call you guys.
How did they treat the women who were coming in for abortions?
Well, that would basically depend on the woman and her attitude. The majority of the time, it was not very pleasant. There was an episode, a couple of times, that we would see she wanted to have an abortion one day, but the second day she came back, and even though she had the lamicells placed in her, she wanted to keep the baby, but they would not do that. They would talk her out of it, saying, well, we've already placed these lambs. You're going to have the abortion.
Did the clinic know she could have been taken to a hospital and they would have basically been able to
change her mind? Yes.
Help her continue the pregnancy?
She was never given that option. She was always, the patient was always told by the doctor and all of the staff gathered around, pressuring her to have that abortion.
Before they even began the procedures, did you see any sort of coercing the women into them?
Well, when you're talking about coercing, you have to talk about, they're given an IV sedation on the second day, the day that they're going to have the procedure. And the IV sedation kind of puts them into what I call a NyQuil nap. I mean, they're just basically drowsy. They're not really thinking for themselves. So that's basically how they were coerced into having a procedure. When you could blatantly hear them in the halls changing their mind, telling them they didn't want to have it done.
Mm-hmm.
But they were forced into having it done by giving more sedation.
So they would withdraw their consent, but then the clinic would drug them.
And that's correct.
And continue the procedure.
That's correct.
What about, you mentioned in a previous conversation, the attitude of a lot of the lesbian employees.
Right. That kind of had a lot of our staff concerned. Once the patient was unconscious, lying on a table, some of the women would make comments, basically of the genitalia area. Nice tattoo, or this one looks really nice, what do you think?
So they were just being generally degrading to the
Very
women.
degrading to the women that were in there.
And this is while the women were unconscious?
Right. While they're unconscious, while they didn't know what was going on.
So these employees are walking around looking at the
Right.
patients.
They were walking around talking to them. There's even been episodes where phone numbers were taken off the charts and people would give them a call weeks down the road asking them out for drinks. It was not uncommon for women or men at the clinic to hit on these women for dates.